Mr. A.K. Purwar, former chairman, State Bank of India, and the industry expert, Ashvin Parekh, managing partner at Ashvin Parekh Advisory. Good morning, Mr. Purwar and Mr. Parekh. Well, Mr. Purwar, let me start with you. Private sector bank consolidation. In fact, one of the names mentioned yesterday, purely rumor, please, we are not confirming anything or even hinting at anything, that the Piramal Group will take over, what was that, Federal, I think. Okay, I mean, these names keep coming up. There is no sanctity about the names. Is it that easy?
No, it's not easy at all. You know, if you private sector banks, the RBI regulations, the way in which these are in place, and you very rightly pointed out, private sector player can purchase only a limited amount, less than 5%. If they purchase 5%, what kind of effective control they would be able to exercise on the bank? It's a very obvious question mark. Having said that, consolidation in private sector, particularly some of the private sector banks which are very efficiently managed, very well managed. They have the cash, they have the management bandwidth. They must flex their muscles, and they must acquire some of their poorer cousins, so to say, in private sector, who are not so well managed. It will lead to some sort of consolidation, growing of size. It will lead to the poor bank, the smaller banks which have been acquired, getting better managed. And also the branch network, all kinds of those advantages.
Well, Mr. Parekh, good morning to you.
Morning.
Can you just walk us through the legal process? Let us assume, say, Federal wants to take over Lakshmi Vilas. I mean, just any names. I'm not giving anything in terms of what the market is talking. What is the process? Should it be an open offer? Because there is no identifiable big promoter in most of these small banks.
Yeah. Well, actually, the question of an open offer, I mean, in case of listed entities, is certainly governed by the SEBI regulations. But I mean, I would say let's look at the subject, and I segment the private sector banking. I mean, particularly now we are not talking of old private sector and new any longer, because this so-called consolidation question, I mean, or the play seems to be coming up open in both these categories of private sector banks. But I mean, I would say a friendly acquisition. That is certainly possible. That is a route which is very open. All these entities come under Indian Companies Act. So if the shareholders, 3/4 of the shareholders agree to let's say a proposed merger, then the merger can be executed, can be really completed. And then the RBI's approval, of course, will be interested. RBI would certainly look at the public interest and the interest of the deposit holders, and they look at the scheme of such a merger, and then thereafter approve. Within the old private sector, so-called old private sector bank, Lata, you will realize that there have been some banks who have been able to draw good seniors, good managing directors, CEO managing directors. These people have been ex-foreign bankers. They've really been able to lead their banks very well. So taking from what Mr. Purwar said, these banks can certainly can look at acquiring some of the smaller ones. The second category would be those where, let's say, the banks are troubled. Or there hasn't been any additional capitalization. These banks are not in a position to grow because they do not have that kind of an ability to raise more capital. Or, I mean, they've just been keeping the shareholding because some shareholders want control on those banks. That's the second category. Now, there are two parts. One is if they come voluntarily and agree to merge, then, of course, that's the best situation. Failing which, if the regulator believes, and that brings me to the next point, and we had seen a lot of this about a decade ago. You had these moratorium, the RBI-led or the regulator and the government-led mergers. These are not seen very often these days, after a global trust bank and a couple of them. We haven't seen that. But RBI still has the powers. I mean, both the Banking Regulation Act and the RBI gave the regulator that empowerment. If they find that there is a troubled bank, either on account of, let's say, issues with the shareholders or with the directors, or if they find that there is a genuine reason in the public interest that bank should be merged with any other bank, then the regulator could certainly do that.
That point is taken. Mr. Purwar, just to carry forward the first point that Ashwin made, because a lot of these banks don't have identifiable promoters, but they have institutions who hold stake. So is friendly merger possible? That's something that we have seen in the past as well.
Yeah, definitely friendly merger is possible. And look at it this way, that market forces are quite important these days. And if a bank is a poorly managed bank, naturally it reflects on its price. It reflects on the market capitalization. It reflects on the management. And those key promoters there, key institutional promoters and key private promoters there, would be interested in sort of sometimes, if they get a reasonably attractive price, they would be interested in selling it off and getting it out. And in the process, if they hold shares in the merged entity, perhaps they might create much better value than what kind of valuation they are commanding today. So these kind of friendly mergers should be market driven, number one, and are very much possible in the present framework, present legal regulatory framework.
Yeah, but how many are available? See, I'm just looking at the shareholding pattern of which bank is this? Karur Vaishya. Promoter is 2%. Dhanlakshmi, I think I saw no promoter. Promoter 0. Then which one is this? DCB. DCB has one promoter who holds about 16%. Federal promoter holding 0. So I mean, how do you take the negotiation forward in this case, Ashwin? It looks like only in which one's case, DCB's case, there is 16%. In the others, there is really no identifiable promoter.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, the whole definition of a promoter, in case of some of these old private sector banks, does demand a certain amount of attention. I mean, in some of the cases, you do have not one shareholder who's got anything more than 2%.
Yeah.
They work together. What they normally do is, I mean, if let's say 7 or 8 of them come together, collectively, if they have anything, that would make a special resolution difficult, let's say, then to that extent, they can sort of stop any kind of lesser discussion around this. And we've seen this in the past. We've seen that there are some in the list that you just mentioned, where collectively the shareholders, the promoters, the so-called promoters, work together, and then they make it difficult really for any kind of an effort, on the part of the other shareholders. So that we've seen in the definition of a promoter, and then declaring someone who's not, I mean, more than a given benchmark percentage holder, is very critical over here. But then, of course, as long as they continue, as long as they function, as long as the RBI does not see them as troubled banks, requiring any intervention, then of course they continue their existence.
RBI intervention kind of thing, that is the United Western Bank variety, is very, very different. But Mr. Purwar, would you agree? I mean, I have a feeling that you must have been sought, your advice must have been sought by promoters or, private equity entrepreneurs who want to get into banking. I don't see any private sector bank other than DCB, which has 16%, being available so easily. So would you warn investors who are trying to play an M&A game in private banks that it's easy, difficult, or is it a dangerous game to play?
No, so somehow or the other I hold a basic premise that everything is available if the price is right. In private sector banks, look at some of the very big private sector banks, highly successful banks. How have they evolved today? They've evolved by way of process of acquisition of some decent banks around them.
But very few, sir. I mean, Kotak got a great buy in ING Vaishya, which was a ripe fruit waiting to fall. But otherwise, HDFC Bank, although it took Centurion and what is that, Lord Krishna Bank, these were like minuscule. It is largely an organic growth story, isn't it?
Yeah, but still, those mergers did help HDFC Bank. Those mergers, those acquisitions helped Kotak Bank. I would look at it this way, as you very rightly said, that I have been a part of the system for a very long time. And maybe perhaps my association with the Indian financial sector is now almost 50 years old. Having said that, I am aware that there are people who sound that, well, we are interested in selling. Those whom we don't think that they are interested in selling, they say they are interested in selling, provided the right price is there. So at a right price, I personally believe a lot of things would be available.
Okay. Well, you have certainly whetted the appetite of investors, Mr. Purwar, by saying that with 50 years of banking experience behind you. Mr. Ashvin Parekh and Mr. Purwar, thank you very much for joining us in this discussion.